Like, this is why you do ministry. Like, you don't know when Jesus is going to show up in their life. It could be today, it could be in a few months, it could be in 10 years. Your job as a coach is to be the person they call. Like, who's the person they would reach out to that was going to listen to me, that's going to care about me? And if we do an awesome job of connecting and owning the circle, like, and don't put parameters on when God's going to move in their life, like, I think we would stop being frustrated and burnt out. Like, God's called me to be here for these students, invest in their life, care for them individually. And like, my job is to plant seeds. It's like, it's not, my job isn't to do the rest, but it's easy to, I don't know, it's easy to convince yourself that your job is to like make growth happen, like through grit and determination. And that doesn't seem to be how God works.
Well, Jake, thanks for coming on to the show, man. I super appreciate it. I have a lot of love for CCV just because my wife grew up there. I know my sister-in-law was on your youth staff for a long time, but you guys are also just a rad church. And every time I'm back visiting family, I'm always there getting to worship with you guys. And I was just there a couple of weeks ago doing that. So I super appreciate you coming on and sharing some wisdom just for anybody listening. But yeah, man, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, how you and how you stumbled on here, and a little bit how you got into ministry, man.
Yeah. All right. So my name's Jake. My role would be that I oversee the student ministry. I'm the director of student ministries at Christ Church of the Valley in Phoenix. For context, that's helpful. Probably we have, I don't know, I think we have 17 campuses currently, and trying to open a few more in the next couple years. So yeah, we're doing multi-church. We're trying our best to figure it out. We feel like we're building the plane in the air. I have been on staff here for almost 10 years. So
wow.
Growing up in Michigan, my dad was a student pastor growing up at a church, an evangelical free church in Michigan, probably had like 700 people at it or something. I don't know, just a small town church. I love my dad's ministry. It was awesome. His youth ministry was awesome. I got to be a part of that. But I didn't want to be a youth pastor. I was like, no shot. I ain't doing that. I'm not following dad. And so I decided to go to school to be a teacher, because that's way different than being a student pastor. And went to school to be a teacher. Met my wife there at a college in Michigan. We decided to take just cold move to Arizona, so to get teaching jobs. And so we got married. We got engaged. 3 months later, got married. 3 days later, got in a U-Haul, drove to Arizona. Didn't know anybody. No reason to come out here. Just got some yeses at a school. We show up here. We're like hopping around for churches a little bit, and we got plugged in with CCV just because someone at our apartment complex was like, "You should come to this group, and you should come check out CCV." I remember going to CCV. My first experience at CCV, our Peoria campus is a very large campus, a big sprawling place. And I remember walking out, like pulling in and being like, "This church sucks. No way I'm gonna like it. It's too big. Like I won't know anybody." But my wife, who didn't grow up in the church as much as me, was like, I could tell she was vibing with it a little bit. So I'm going to stick it out. Well, whatever, we'll do this. And we go to, we stick around afterwards. We talk to some people, say hi. A dude talks to us for a little bit. I get his name, catch his name. His name's Travis. And hey, next week, their starting point, we'd love to get you plugged in. Starting point, our like introductory class to our church. And in my church experience growing up is like, we will not get plugged in unless we start serving. So, hey, let's go to this class next week. And we show up the next week, and I'm still like, this church is way too big. Like, this is stupid. We're never going to meet anybody. Whatever. We'll go to this class. We walk out of service. We walk into the starting point class. We're walking in, Bree and I, and someone like behind us goes like, "Hey, Jake, Bree." And we turn around. It was the one dude who had talked to us last week. And I think that legit is the reason we're still here.
Wow.
Fun fact about that guy is Travis Brown. He at the time was just on guest service. I think he's now the campus pastor of that large campus. And I've told him that story. He didn't remember that story. He's just doing his job, but that radically impacted us. So we got plugged in there. We started coaching a group. We started coaching in high school. Still teaching. I taught 6th grade. And the story with ministry for me is there's a dude, Michael Cooper, who was the lead student pastor at the time, Peoria. And he's bugging me. Like, "Hey man, you should," and I'm kind of like thinking maybe ministry, I could do ministry. I had some friends who were doing the residency. They were excited about it. So first year we start coaching in high school in January, I think. That first camp season, which CCV does, camp's huge. We tend to all out for camp and make it a priority. And Michael Cooper kept bugging me like, hey man, you got to show up at this camp. You got to be invested in this. And my wife and I, we're going to be teachers. We're going to go home for the summer in Michigan. We're just going to sit at the beach for 2 months. And I said, no way I'm going to camp. I ain't doing that. I got my summers.
Wait, there's a beach in Michigan?
Yeah,
that's not like 40 degrees.
Listen, it's better. It's better than the ocean, Lake Michigan. That's the take.
Cool.
Lake Michigan better than the ocean.
That's a take.
It's not even a hot take. It's the best take. If you've been there, you know you can't see across it. It's like the ocean, but no salt. The beach is nicer. Anyways, unless you like surfing, it's not as good. But if you're not going to the ocean for surfing, Lake Michigan better. So, anyways, that was the plan. We get in a car to drive back home, and on the 30-hour drive home, we're just talking, and I think we need to go to this camp. So we bought plane tickets in Michigan to fly back to Phoenix to go on this high school camp, and that's the reason I'm in ministry, because we said yes. We just said yes, like, hey, let's do it. Let's jump in. I go to this camp. We're running around because Michael Cooper is stoked. He's asking me to show up. We get there, and instantly it like registers of like, what am I doing? Like, why am I teaching math? Like, why am I teaching math? I need to be doing ministry. And we go through the process of that year to get plugged in. I was going to do the residency program we have. It's like a year-long program. Yeah, and I applied for that, and I was an idiot, so I didn't understand, but I had like a second follow-up interview after that, which if I was smarter, I would have realized this is probably like a job interview, but I wasn't smart. And so I remember meeting with the campus pastor of the new Anthem campus they were opening. I didn't even ask who he was, didn't know. I showed up at the Starbucks in cargo shorts and a t-shirt, talked for an hour, get in the car to drive back with the dude who brought me, and I'm like, who was that guy? They're like, oh, that's the campus pastor of Anthem. And I was like, what? And so I was like, man, I would love to get a job there, but I figured I blew it. I crushed. I didn't ask him one question.
I was wearing cargo shorts. Why?
It's a mess. And this was like in the window where cargo shorts weren't cool. Like, they're kind of coming back now. They were not cool when I was wearing them. And so we go. They announced.
They've never been cool.
Well, listen, speak for yourself. They were sweet for a while. They announced
the things I could carry.
Gary's, I love him, man. I'm stoked they're coming back. Basically, they announced him at the front of our Peoria campus, Randy, and I go to my wife, hey, Bree, like, we need to go down and say hi. Like, I blew it last time. Let me go introduce myself. And we walk down there, and as we're walking up, Randy's daughter recognizes Bree and goes, whoa, Bree, and runs up to Bree, and Bree starts talking to her. I'm like, what is happening? How do you know this person? Turns out, of like the 100 high school groups at the Peoria campus, my wife was her youth coach, which we didn't know. And I just remember, it's just crazy how God shows up through relationships and through connections. And I remember walking out of the auditorium that day, and I told Bree, I'm like, hey, I said, I'm going to get that job because of you. Randy called me like 2 days later, and we got it sorted out. So I helped launch our Anthem campus, one of our multi-sites. Was there for 7 years. And then I transitioned into this role almost 3 years ago, which is like the director of student ministry. So on our central team, overseeing our vision, direction, content, hiring, job description, kind of just allowing our the job of our central team is to allow our student pastors to just love people, be with people, disciple people, be Jesus to people. And our job is to hopefully allow them to do that better. So yeah, that's our story. It's been 10 years. It's been crazy. It's been awesome. In the middle of that, we've had 4 kids. So that's been crazy.
Wow.
But God is awesome. God is good. And I'm stoked to get to do this. It's pretty crazy. I probably once a month, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I get to do this. This is crazy.
That's so cool. And plus it's cool, just listening to your story, like, sometimes you can get, even you walk up to the big thing and it can feel, especially if you're like at a small church, you're like, man, I feel like everything we do doesn't feel like it's not what I want it to be. We don't have the money or the facilities. But for you, you're like, the only thing that really matters is that somebody remembered our name and that
Yep.
it was a personal connection. So like, that's so cool to see how God uses those relationships. And that's infinitely scalable, right? You do that at a house church in a small group, all the way to the church of, at the big campus of thousands of people. And that's really all that matters, right? Is those personal touches. And that's what you're trying to set your team up to do. Mm-hmm. But man, there's a lot of things happening in your world. Like CCV is no joke, like 17 campuses. I mean, how many staff do you kind of manage right now?
So the way our structure works is our student pastors, their like direct report is their campus pastor. That's which makes sense because they see them all the time. And then I would be considered their dotted line boss. So I speak into their reviews. I guess I give them feedback on what they're doing. And so our team of student pastors, we have currently almost 40 student pastors globally. And then the team, our central team specifically, there are two people who work directly with me. And then there are a couple other teams, a next gen video team, a next gen worship team, like an events team that they come alongside and really help us execute things. They're not technically on our team, but they work with us and they help us execute our vision. So
That's amazing. So talking vision, how do you cast vision to that many people and keep everybody rowing in the same direction? Because that's hard enough to do if you have a handful of volunteers, just making sure everybody's always like as you're saying, this is where we're going and this is who we are. How do you keep everybody on the same page? And I'd love to talk a little bit about vision. Like, what is it that you're chasing right now that you're moving towards,
yeah.
that you really feel like God's given you guys? And how do you do that?
I don't know. I don't know. I think I can tell you what we're trying, and I can tell you what we think works, but I don't know if we have the magic bullet. I think what's key with vision is you just say it all of the time. I think our senior pastor would say, I don't know if this is his thing, but this idea of like vision leaks. Like if you don't keep putting it in front of people, they're going to forget about it. And oftentimes, what happens with vision and with ideas is that I can forget that I've been at this church for 10 years. So stuff that I just assume everybody knows, of course they don't know. And then it trickles down to volunteers too. Like what, like you know this thing because you live and breathe and you understand this thing every single day. Your volunteers show up for an hour weekly and they rotate and rotate out. And so you can't ever get sick of saying the things that are your priority, saying the things that are your vision. And our student ministry, we've kind of like narrowed our focus a little bit, tried to. And so we have two large visions that we say consistently and loudly from stage. And basically the job of our weekend experience, what we would say that the first goal, 1A, is that we want to make a Christ-like community that kids want to come back to with their friends. Like, can we make a community that is like Jesus that kids want to come back to with their friends? And so, and it's simple, but we did it this way. Our church, and then 1B is this. 1B is this. We want to put students next to coaches to disciple them through their next steps. So our church is we're a big next steps church. So basically next step, like attending, reading your Bible, serving, being in a small group, all of those things that we want to push students towards and adults towards too. That would be probably the way that we choose to attack discipleship. Is it the best way? I don't know. That's just the way our church does it. And it's, I think it seems to be working, but we initially, there was always confusion in our student ministry about what's the most important thing. So if you make next steps the first thing, what happens is like you might like baptism the most. I might like reading the Bible the most. You might like being in a group the most. And what happens on accident is that everybody's ministries start to look a little different based on the next step that they get fired up about the most.
Yep.
And none of those things are bad, but you've just created lack of clarity in your vision. And so by moving that to like the number 2 thing and making the number 1 thing, like, do students want to come back to this place? We can all align on that. Like we've all been to a party that sucked. Like we've all been invited to a house and it was like, ain't coming back here. And most of it's all the same. Like, did someone welcome me? Did I feel accepted? Was it fun? Did I get to participate? Did someone ask me a question? Did someone listen to me? When they were playing the game, did they ask me to play too? Like, and what's crazy about it is I think back to even just the story, like we get so caught up in the big show. And we think that's going to move the needle when really it's like when a student walks into your doors, do they feel safe? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel important? And we want to do that first, like more than anything. And that has been really helpful for our vision. So I can get up and every time I'm in front of coaches, I'm saying those 2 things over and over again. here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's where you matter as a coach. You have to be next to a student, and you know their life. You know what they're doing. You ask them questions. You invest in their life. And so
I hate to see that in the, he saw her in the thing. And it's so easy to focus on the crowd and forget, like, no, but is every kid being seen? Like all the, we'll work through all the mumbo jumbo of like, yeah, that transition was bad. The game was a flop, maybe, or whatever. And we can obsess, but it's like, but nothing really matters, if it's not like, you can deal with something. Like if you have a great experience, like you said, at a restaurant, yeah, the food's okay. Like you're going to eat again. You're going to go get, something to drink somewhere or whatever. Like your next step's always coming. But like for you to go back and get it there, you've got to feel like you had something registered in you. And that's not something that has really too much to do with programming. At least I've seen it's got almost everything to do with your team and your people and the culture of the students to say like, hey, are your kids looking out for them? Are your students saying like, hey, like we own that just as much as the coaches do?
I think what it does is it takes, especially so the way we do church is that our central team sends like the content to you. And so you're executing a weekend service that was planned by our central team. So the message is often in junior high, it's a pre-recorded message. In high school, sometimes it's live, but it's a simulcasted message. But what you're doing by making the priority relational is you're saying, hey, that thing we're sending to you isn't the reason that you're growing or isn't the reason you're making an impact. It's what you're doing at your campus. And we're making this a priority and we're handing this to you so you can spend all this extra time being Jesus next to people, coaching and developing coaches. I think we've shared lately a thing that we get dinged for a lot. Probably most large multi-site churches get dinged for this. And at some point is the like, hey, wouldn't it be better if you had each individual campus preach the message every week, have the person at that campus? We hear that a lot. And I think for us, I'm not even against that. Like, sweet. If you want to do that, awesome. The way we process it is, hey, we're about to have 20 campuses. And let's say you want to preach a decent message. Hopefully that's at least 10 hours of your life that you've prepped for that. Even if someone sends you the bones, it's still 10 hours. So let's say, if we had 20 people, 10 hours a week times 50 weeks a year, that's 10,000 hours a year. Our staff is preparing messages. And I bet all the money I have that 10,000 hours sitting next to people is 1,000 times more valuable. That you can sit down next to someone and like invest. That's 10 extra hours a week that you can meet with a coach, that you can develop a volunteer, that you can like multiply yourself, that you can sit next to a student and ask them hard questions. And it fires me up. It fires me up that what we get to do is we take stuff off of student pastors' plates to do the only thing that I think we are called to do. And that is like relationally disciple people. And that's why I love getting to do what we do.
Does it ever make you wonder, like driving by different churches, like, in Phoenix, you just drive down the road, or any city really in America. I mean, maybe less the farther west and east you go now, but you're like, how many, I don't want to say wasted hours, but like if like aggregate time spent producing content, all these little places that probably we could reallocate towards, like you said, disciple making activities of, hey, let's go hang out with people. Let's go read the Bible with people. Let's pray with them. Let's model how to follow Jesus. Not that you're not doing that from your message, and not to diminish the incredible ministry of the pulpit and the calling and the sanctity of that, as we see all through Scripture. But to your point, I love that. I think that sets up your pastors and your team to really do the things that really foster growth, not just in a numerical sense, but also in that personal growth sense of, that life on life is everything. That's huge, but it's also super hard.
Yeah, it was. It's hard to release that. Like, it's hard to release the like, oh, I want to do this thing. And to be clear, like all of our student pastors probably 6 or 8 times a year, they do give the message. They have opportunities to do that, make connections up there on stage every weekend, obviously. But, I think we tend to overthink in student ministry and adult ministry too, in church ministry, the value of like the message comparatively. And I don't want to downplay it. Someone should give a message. I'm very pro that. But I think sometimes we think the message is what is going to get people to show up the next week and engage in Scripture. And I'm not sure that always is the case. You gotta throw something at the lights over there.
Yeah, I had to get my freaking sensor, dude. This thing is bonkers, bro. Gotta get it.
Stand up, do some jumping jacks and stuff.
Like, this is where the standing desk comes in. I need it.
There you go. You need it just to stand up so then turn the light out.
Sometimes I'm like, I want it off, and then other times I just want it on. Right now, I want it on. But yeah, to your point, I think that right, wrong, and different. I think the principle is focus on relationships, focus on discipleship. And so, how do you do that? Like, how do you set up your team to do that week in and week out? Start with your pastors down to your volunteers, because I think that's a great concept. I think it's great to that everybody's chasing after that, but sometimes the practicals of like, how do we actually articulate what exactly we want this volunteer who's only got maybe a couple hours here and maybe an hour or two outside of group time, 3-4 hours max a week to dedicate to that, which is still a really big ask.
Yeah.
What are you asking your team to do? How have you seen that work, not work?
I mean, I guess for our student pastors, probably in their 40, 45 hour week, of that time, we would say that like 6 to 8 hours a week expectation is in your community, like at a school, at a gym, like doing something where students are. And so you're going to them during the day. And then there's probably another 5 to 15 hours a week that we would say, hey, this is intentional person time. This is coffees. This is one-on-ones. This is talking about it. The things that we talk a lot about, like, hey, the way you cast vision to coaches isn't via an email blast. It's not via a document. It's via like a one-on-one conversation. So even though you may think it's easier, and it is easier for me to just write an email and send it to everybody. It's way less effective. And I think most of the time when I talk to people, I would say there's a perception that our volunteers are struggling due to lack of resources. And I would almost always argue it's due to lack of relational equity. There's resources everywhere. Like literally Google anything you want to know. Someone has built a resource on it and it's awesome. Like it might not have your branding on it. It might not have your church's branding on it, or it might not have like your spin on it, but there are resources for everything that exist. And sometimes I think it's easy in ministry to convince yourself to be in the resource building game. Like I got to make a new resource for people. And I think if I were to ask you, and I just share my story, now a student pastor say, what's the reason you're in ministry? No one's saying a resource. They're saying a relationship. They're listing the name of a person that like was Jesus to them and pushed them intentionally. And I'm not even saying that it's bad that you do this, because I do this too. It's by default. The longer you're in ministry, it like something pulls you away, which sucks from like the people part of it. Because I think maybe because it's so simple and you're thinking like, we need to do something. I need to write something or make something. And I'm like, yeah, I think you need to just take someone out to coffee. And so we have, we're blessed. We have a budget, like a massive part of our student pastor's budget is like taking coaches out and investing in them. So we get to do that. That's an awesome perk that we have. A thing we talk about really consistently, all our volunteers are called coaches. And we have a coach acronym that we use that I think it moves people through like this shows you how to coach. It shows you how to lead a coach. So coach is just, the C stands for connect. So we get to talk about, hey, we want you to be someone that's intentional and learns names and talks to new people. And so that's the C stands for connect. O is for own the circle. So all of our church is so small group heavy. It's awesome. I love it. So from literally starting in second grade till you're an adult, all through next gen, second grade and up, part of your service is small groups. So it's built in, like 15 minutes of small groups. Starting in junior high, you have a coach that you interact with a little bit. And in high school, those are like 35-minute groups every Sunday night. And so when we say circle, it's like your group. Own your group. Like you as a coach, do you know what they're doing? Do you know their names? Do you know what their basketball game is? Do you check in on them during the week? In that small group time, if kids are messing around, like you're in charge. Like you can have a good conversation. Care for that group outside of just Sunday nights. A is for actively participate, which basically is the idea of like, if you're watching the message on your phone, so are your kids. If during worship, you're not engaged in worship, of course your kids aren't engaged in worship. If afterwards, when we're playing volleyball, you're just sitting on a bench, like your kids aren't going to play volleyball. Like get in the game, like participate in stuff. The reason, for my money, the reason camp works, everybody always talks about when they go to camp, the small groups were so amazing. Like that's the reason, the best small groups ever. And I think it's easy to think it's because of the questions. Let me tell you, it's not the questions or the messages. It's not that. It's because you spent all day with your kids. Like you were with them the whole day. And then when you sat down to talk about something, you've earned all these chips. Like, so
Yeah.
that the relational equity and the way you participate with them sets you up to have good conversations. And then the CH we cheated, we got lazy, that we combined the CH of coach, is, just for challenge. And so we want to, like, as a coach, are you challenging your students to be more like Jesus? And are you challenging yourself to be more like Jesus? So like, as a coach, are you are you reading the scripture? Are you hanging out in the Bible? Or are you just telling students to do that? And so what's cool is that's our vision. It's loud, it's clear globally, like second grade through next gen. And when I meet with a coach, that I just do that on a loop. Like if you're someone who coaches for a long time, you should have heard those four things over and over and over again. And it's very clear what the goal is and what the purpose is. And you might not do the whole thing, but if I meet with you 4 times a year, let's say, that's one of those per time. And you just say, hey, dude, we're gonna talk about connect tomorrow. And after you relationally talk to them a little bit, you say, hey, how are you doing at this? What's something you can work on? And I think it gives our student pastors some direction and some clarity, and it sets them up to have good conversations. We've seen a lot of success with that.
Yeah, I love that. I've not heard that before, so I'm probably going to steal that.
It's yours. You can have it.
I,
I'll send you something. You want a document? I'll give it to you.
yeah, please. And if you're open to maybe sharing it, maybe that's a chance for some people who, if they watch this, you want to follow up, you might get some DMs or an email or something, whatever you're willing to give us to get connected on that. I have a question though, personally, and I don't know if anybody else listening to this will wrestle with this. Like if you have a system, because it sounds like we're similar. We're on Wednesdays and you guys do your Sundays.
Yep.
Saturday, Sunday.
High school Sunday night, junior high Saturday. Yeah.
On group, maybe quality control. We struggle with this a lot. Our group is very evangelistic. We have a lot of non-church, D-church, whatever, but they're all kind of intermingled with our kids that have grown up in it. And it's like, there's always this tension. I'm sure you've wrestled with this over the years of like the kids that have been following Jesus for a while. They're like, we're just kind of like trying to get on the same page. And it feels like it's not like a waste of time, but we didn't really get into it much, Mm-hmm. And then for the non-Christian kids, they're just sort of like exploring these concepts for the first time, or you're just trying to get to know them. And with how I don't know if your groups are really transient. I know we have, their kids are in and out all the time. Yep. How do you dial in that, like owning the circle? And how would you, maybe if I'm a group leader, because I struggle with this at times, even, been in ministry almost a decade, like how do you meet that? How do you maybe you can coach me right now on owning the circle. I'm struggling. What do I do?
I think that here's what I would first say. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. Like, I honestly think that the number one thing you could do to make sure kids of every varying, like, spiritual level feel engaged is engage with them. Like, I actually think it has less to do with like the specific content and more to do with like, are you allowing them to ask open-ended questions? Are you also allowing them to answer their own questions and not jumping in and like talking over them all the time? And some groups that struggle have a coach that will like just take all the conversation the whole time. And this, like, which is the coach questions is the bane of my existence, as a content person. Because what I really want to say is the good coaches don't need questions. Like your best coaches shouldn't be looking at this thing. They should be paying attention to the message, paying attention to their group, because they know their group. They know that Kyle had a test this week. They know that Justin just broke up with his girlfriend. They know that like this person's dad is like wildly competitive and he's shy because that's what owning the circle is. Do I know these kids individually so I can tailor a question specifically to them? But I think another thing we talk about is, for the students that are vocalizing that, like, hey, I'm not sure this is like for me anymore. It's not like deep enough. I think the best answer to that is like, hey, you figured it out.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
it's not about you.
Yeah, it's not about
you. Welcome to the next level.
Yeah. Well, dude, listen, you did it. Yeah. You found the secret level in Mario. Like, it's like you figured it out. And what's tough there is I'll say, hey, just a heads up, you're going to be going to adult church for the rest of your life. And it's the same. Like, it's the same with different words. Like, it's all like, that's what we're doing. And hopefully you have heard all those same things. Like, there's a certain level of, like I said, my dad was a pastor. So I grew up in the church. I've been doing ministry for 10 years. There times when I learned something or been a message that was like, whoa, haven't heard that before. Yes. Yes. But often not. Often everything that's said is a thing I've heard before. And this is crazy because the Bible hasn't changed. So like it's the same stuff in there. Uh, what I think
Yeah.
is cool to help coach people through is like the information may not change, but because of your like spiritual development and your wisdom, your application should change. Like your ability to contextualize something should differ as you become more spiritually mature. So like a message about patience, this is a good recent example of like, we just talked about fruits of the spirit. I was like, oh, you got patience figured out? Like, oh, sick. Let me know.
Yeah.
Like you're good at all those. And there's this idea of like, no, hopefully as you're more mature, you understand that the, like Jesus, we're going to talk about the gospel every single time. That's all we're supposed to talk about. Like, and you get to then extrapolate and figure out how to like apply these concepts to your life differently than someone who's brand new. And I think that's a fun conversation, and also empowering coaches to be like, hey, if you have a group of kids that want more, what are you doing on Tuesday mornings? Like,
Yeah.
why don't you meet them at a coffee shop? Like, why don't you, like, we would never tell anybody to not do that. Like, no, go find that, go seek that out. And know that we need you here on Sunday nights because we need you to help influence people who are new. So don't opt out anymore. Like, don't bail on this, but you have now entered into this new space where you get to invest in other people. So,
Yeah. And I was reading a book about this big mega church that was in Lubbock, Texas. That's sort of decentralized and basically got really inspired by kind of house church, micro church stuff happening overseas.
yeah.
And he built a great relationship with this guy in India who had like, over 1 million people that were connected to their ministry. And he's like, what are you doing? And so they flew him over and they said, will you just sit at our church and just go to our services and go to our groups and sit with our staff and pray with our team? And there's a snippet in the book that was really, the guy wrote a book about their process of going through that.
Yeah.
And he said that the Indian pastor, he says, your church is very strange. People come to your teaching, they hear a message, and then they leave. And then they come back expecting a new message, but we have no idea if they did it. He says, we would never do this. We would just keep talking about prayer until we were all praying, and then we would move on.
Yeah, that's all.
And I'm
awesome.
like, he's like, we would just teach the same lesson again until they sunk in or people would realize like, oh, maybe this isn't for me. And then they would leave. And I was like, that perspective of like, really, like we do this not for information, but for transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And the relational side of like, and the context of that's very different, the way that they do that. It's all they do is groups essentially, right? They don't have like a central kind of teaching time really in those types of contexts, or it doesn't look the same as we go sit in a room with thousands of people and watch a message and then just kind of, who cares if you do it, you bounce like, but I think that principle is really powerful of saying, and I think that rolls into your coaching philosophy really well of like everything leads into this challenge of what's it going to take to push your students to take their next step. And really that they don't necessarily need another resource, but that the relationship is the resource, which I think is so powerful.
I also think what's tough in ministry and I would say in next gen ministry specifically is, this is a Kurt Johnston thing. This is from, Saddleback. He would share this idea. I think what happens is normally we assume that like when I sit next to a student, their spiritual journey will just look like this over time. Like it'll look directly to the up, or the reality of students' life is all crazy, like up and down, up and down. And like your job.
Mine too.
Yeah, exactly. Like your job as a life coach is to try to mirror their life, to like be next to them the whole time. Literally 20 minutes ago, our special needs pastor walked in and she was sharing a story that like a couple weeks ago, she pulled over on the side of the road, big interaction. It was raining. This was literally last night. A girl, 17-year-old girl was basically trying to go into traffic, commit suicide. So, like crazy story. Laura pulled over and she just engages. Like, I'm in. Like there's other people there, but she sat down next to this person. This girl basically is saying, hey, no one likes me. My parents don't care. Like nothing. And Laura's like, no, I care. Will you care? And so she's 17. She mentions that she's gonna go to the hospital. Hey, can you call Jamie? And Laura's like, who's Jamie? And this girl says, Jamie is the only person that cares about me. She was my junior high youth coach.
Wow.
So that, and I don't even know the story, but like the reality is that she probably hasn't connected with church in over 4 or 5 years. And the person that she remembers is this coach from junior high. And I bet if you ask that coach about this girl, she might even say like, she was never around, like she wasn't connected, she never cared. Like this is why you do ministry. Like you don't know when Jesus is going to show up in their life. It could be today, it could be in a few months, it could be in 10 years. Your job as a coach is to be the person they call. Like who's the person they would reach out to that was going to listen to me, that's going to care about me. And if we do an awesome job of connecting and own the circle, like, and don't put parameters on when God's going to move in their life, like, I think we would stop being frustrated and burnt out. Like God's called me to be here for these students, invest in their life, care for them individually. And like, my job is to plant seeds. It's like, it's not, my job isn't to do the rest, but it's easy to, I don't know, it's easy to convince yourself that your job is to like make growth happen, like through grit and determination. And that doesn't seem to be how God works.
And doesn't that set you free?
It should.
Like,
yeah,
even if, like, I don't know, I'm sure you could find it if you looked up her name in your database, if you rock or whatever you guys use, and you could probably find exactly the number. Let's just say it was 7 times. It's like maybe that kid only came to programming 7 times ever. Mm-hmm. Like most people would be like, that doesn't really, what's it going to do? It's only about the long haul. Like, but like God used those 7 conversations to save her life. And it's like every opportunity is so huge, like every circle, every time, every touch point, like every conversation, every message, I look someone in the eyes, like I see you, I care about you, I love you. And so does God. And that's why we're here. Like that's what it's about. I love that. So thank you for sharing that story. That's inspiring to me, just like focus on planting the seed. We know that scripture, God brings the growth.
I was at a conference recently and they shared this data. It was interesting. It was long form data of like what things, it was like a multi-generational survey of what made kids most likely to pursue the faith of their parents long term. And they boiled it all down to this one word, and it was closeness. And a family that just shows closeness is warmth is the word. So like kind, generous, safe, like modeling of their faith and open conversations. Those are the 3 things. And the process for us, which you probably just do. I like when like data and studies just back up what you already thought. It makes you feel good. Good for me. But we just shared all that with our coaches and we're like, hey, we're not asking you to be their parents. You can't be their parent. Like their parent is the number one driver of their growth. However, I think we can be spiritual moms and dads for these kids for like a window of time. And the way that you know if you're crushing it is if your group would be described as like if closeness would describe your group. Is it warm? Do people feel like they're accepted and they understand? Do you model your faith or do you just show up on Sunday nights? Or like, do you show up in their world during the week? Do you invite them into your life even when your life sucks and you show them what following Jesus looks like when you have 4 kids who are screaming right before bed? Like, do you do that ever? Or do you just show up on Sundays for an hour? Or you just invite your girls over to your house once every 8 months and you've planned it 6 months out and you've cleaned the whole house and you make cookies and it's perfect? Or do you invite them into your house when you're actually like living a life that is pursuing Jesus? And then the last one is like open. Like, does your group have space for them to ask real questions and to be confused and to allow them to process things and not feel like you have to say, no, that's wrong. Like, let them work through it. And that stuff excites me. And that's where my brain, if you were to, I think one of the questions you were going to ask, like, hey, what are you thinking about? I think for me, I'm thinking about how do we get coaches to understand the value of like letting students churn through their thoughts and not just like telling them the answer to these questions. So when you figure that out, let me know.
Well, I think that's why we're still in it. And hopefully why these types of conversations for anybody watching this or listening can hopefully keep chewing on that and wrestling with that. But just to keep moving, I want to get kind of practical for anybody listening to this. because it's so easy to get caught up in all the things we talked about with the programming of the content or the preaching, and not that those aren't important, but what would be some things that you feel like, hey, you got to be focusing on this right now? Like whether it's maybe this moment in time and some cultural things you're seeing, just to speak to pastors in the moment, or it may just be something timeless. You're like, hey, like we've been talking about relationships. I mean, I would put that in there. Like, look, that's the number one thing. Like if you're not focusing on relationships and you're not focusing on relational disciple making, like I know that's what, when we came into the semester for my team, I said, that we have to remember that's never changed. It's never going to change. But so what are we doing there? So what are some things that you feel like are going to be just pivotal for pastors listening to this to be aware of, thinking about, and really doubling down on in this season?
This is something we talk about a little bit. And I think whether you're at a larger church or not, I think the first thing that you got to do to be a good student pastor is to stop complaining about your church's decisions. Like, it's easy in student ministry to assume that every decision is like at the expense of student ministry. And it's easy I feel this as a student pastor. Oftentimes student ministry is like you get called into the principal's office and like, your numbers aren't good. It's like, because for some reason it's the thing that everybody thinks they can fix really easily. So leadership tends to do that and pull you in. And I think it's really like demoralizing if you just get caught in this, like, well, the reason we're not growing is those things. And I just think after being in it and doing it, like the reason that your ministry is healthy is because of you're investing in people, like in your relational, like equity there. And my encouragement would be like, no one's telling you to not do that. Like no one's telling you not to stand next to people and like invest in their life. And you waste a lot of time. We had someone come and talk about like creatives, and oftentimes student pastors would fall like they're like the borderline creatives. They're not quite necessarily there, but they're definitely, most student pastors aren't like the follow the rules people. And so oftentimes creatives, they would say they're like a bird cage, and they get really frustrated that there's a cage, and they're like, well, how can I do anything in this cage? And this guy was like, this cage is actually helpful because it allows you to, like, there's no rules on how creative you can be in the cage. Like some of you have this cage and you're annoyed, but you're just using this part of the cage when you can use like all of this. Like, have you explored all of the things you can do? I don't know. I would encourage you to be someone like, because I've fallen into this trap before of being so frustrated with what I was being told to do that I didn't take any ownership for what I could do.
And I think ownership is the key, right? Like, so, some of the principle of why I'm doing this, the show is to help introduce leadership principles, and ultimately, where it makes sense to kind of come alongside and help do some coaching around pastors that need that. And like the number one coaching principle, the two biggest things of all the training stuff that I've done around that, regardless of your field, ministry, not ministry, business, personal life, is increasing ownership and accountability. Like if you, and awareness, those three things, like if you understand, you're aware, like, hey, I'm deferring the problem on something else on my pastor, on the kids won't do this. The parents won't, the culture's hard. Like you're just deflecting ownership. You're just saying, I don't need to own this. It's somebody else's problem. Because then you're off the hook. The whole principle of getting better is continuously putting yourself on the hook. Mm-hmm. How do you keep yourself on the hook for things and for things that you can control? Yep. The nice part is you can't control anyone but yourself, and it should set you free. But at the same time, like you've got to increase ownership over those things, to your point being like, you can't do anything. Maybe you can do some things about your budget, but the decisions that your pastors make, you can't change that. What you can control is how to maximize everything that they give you, in the season that you're in, and saying, I can't do that, but think of the million things for free that I could be doing right now, of time and relationships, of investment, of prayer, of leaning into the Holy Spirit and what he's calling us to do in this season. Those are all ways of saying, like, those are things that I can own, that the Lord is offering to me to come alongside of me. And now the game is, how do I hold myself accountable to those things? Mm-hmm. How do I put myself on the hook to control and focus on the things that I can, and release the million things that you can't back to the Lord to say, like, these are on you. But there's like, I just want to like rest in the grace that you have given me to do the things that you've called me to, and not worry about all this stuff that I can't change, because it's not going to, it's only going to make you frustrated, which is why I think so many people, and I've had way too many conversations, quit ministry because they get so frustrated about all this stuff that's out of their control. And that's exactly what I think the devil wants, is for people to take their eyes off of the only thing that they can do, which is keep pursuing the Lord and keep loving people and the simple things in ministry. So I don't know if you resonate with that or have seen that as a pattern over and over, but I've seen that in my own life and my own bad attitude. And I've seen it in the lives of our team and volunteers and other staff people. And it's chronic.
It's debilitating. The statement that probably like 3 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that I stumbled upon that has been like consistently convicting and consistently helpful for me is, when I'm frustrated with something, the question is, hey, is this a Jake problem or a Jesus problem? Like, is this a Jake issue or a Jesus issue? And I think if you ask that a lot, you're going to be frustrated how often it's just a you issue. Like, most of the hills that we spend all our time trying to die on, at the end of the day, are just Jake issues. They're just, oh, this is what I wanted to do, my opinion. And it's like, oh, what am I doing? Like, why am I so frustrated? Why am I allowing it to go home and make my like home life? Like, I'm going home, now my wife's mad about this thing that's not even a big deal. Like, I mean, that would be another piece of advice about just be really careful with, if you're married, your spouse's or your family's perception of your church is 100% on you. Any opinion they have of your leaders, of your building, of your church, of your ministry, is only from the things you have said to them. So just be careful. Like, just take ownership of the way you talk about your leaders at home, and the way you speak into them. I know I've been a thing I've struggled with, in the idea of like, I might come home and I might have had like an argument or something at work or conversation, and I'll kind of share it flippantly. And then I'll go home the next day or work the next day, and like, we sorted out, we're good. Like, oh, it was good. Yeah, we're fine. I don't tell my wife that. And so my wife now is like simmering on this thing for like a few weeks, and she'll finally ask, how are you and that guy doing? And I'm like, well, we're doing fine. But I've been praying for you for like 2 weeks. And like, and it's just not fair. It's not fair that you would do that to your family. And so I don't know if that's, it's kind of related, tangent, but, a practical thing that we do, that we talk about is in our ministry for coaches, is just to process and think through like what type of coaches you have often. Accountability. I think having awesome coaches is the reason your ministry is good. And so if you were going to focus on anything, I would say focus on who you have in your building coaching. Raise the bar there. If you raise the bar there, it raises the bar everywhere else. We have like a coach triangle thing we talk about often, which is basically you want 25% of your coaches to be, we call them multipliers, which is they're people want to be around, they're people students want to be around. They make your other coaches better. And you want to make sure at least 25 of your coaches fit into that box. 50% of your coaches, we hope, fit into they're good coaches. They come all the time. They're consistent. They're invested. And then probably 25% on the bottom are your developing coaches that are like, we're working on them. A hard statement I would probably say is, if you have a coach in the developing stage for more than 6 months, you should exit them. Like, just be willing to like say, hey, this isn't a great fit for you. Because if your developing coach ratio gets too big, man, it's so easy for the whole culture of your coaches to flip, like really quickly flip. And so don't be afraid as a leader of your ministry to pay attention to your coaches, and be willing to say, hey, I was going to say, have you tried kids? But that was mean. That was a bad joke. Have you thought about the coffee shop? Have you thought about the parking lot? And
well,
just like,
I mean, yeah. And how much of that have you seen too? It helps to have multiple levels of leadership and volunteering areas where you say like, look, I've got a really great fit for you.
Yep.
Maybe you leading this circle is not the best fit right now, but I think what would be better for you. And it's what you're giving people an out that they still have ownership over the ministry.
Yep.
And it's not like one's less or more important necessarily, it's, in God's eyes, but it's like, hey, being a door greeter in the house of the Lord isn't a shameful position. It's not a demotion. Like, like
No,
this is one of
you're
the
doing
things, like you are helping change, someone's life just because you don't have the skill set necessarily right now, the competency to be, owning that. But like, man, God's really gifted you at this, and I need this, and we need this,
turn this off.
So I think that's been a little secret, dirty leadership secret that we've
That's
that we've
awesome.
used is like just casting a super eye vision for the areas of serving that might not be as detrimental to your culture as some areas have the tendency to be or could
correct.
be if they
And
go
I think
sideways.
what's good is if you're loud about the vision, people who aren't aligned with the vision often will self-exit if you're loud about it. And
I
that's not
also
even
just bug them. I've also done that where I've just been like, hey, let's get together. Let's talk about your group and just do that like way more than they're used to. Then they're like, this is way too high of a commitment. I can't handle this. I just don't think it's the time for me. I'm like, you know what? You're right.
No, that's an art though. You can do a whole conversation on firing volunteers. That's like
yeah.
I don't.
We'll do that for our next time.
Yeah, sweet. It's definitely not fun, but it's necessary. I would say, especially if you're thinking about like, what's a thing I could do to change the culture quickly. Like, man, one really loud negative coach could be the thing that is like holding back. Like it bleeds, man. The energy bleeds everywhere. And how do you be really, it's a tough line to walk, but I think it's worth talking about and thinking through how can you put them somewhere where they're more excited and more positive and, not allow that to like trickle into your students because it's fair or not fair. A lot of students' opinion of Jesus has to do with the way their youth group treated them, which that's a hard pill to swallow. But yeah,
and that's just the reality. That's what we carry as leadership, right? That's the burden that we carry, which can be discouraging and can be really frustrating. And sometimes you get into these conversations and you think about all the nuanced aspects of ministry, and you can just feel overwhelmed. You can just feel defeated. So, what are maybe just kind of as we wrap up, just a few words of encouragement for student pastors, or maybe if you small group leaders listening, or people that are thinking about this. There's just some things that you could just to encourage people to not quit and to keep going, and some things maybe that have kept you in ministry for over a decade. Like,
well, one is I would just encourage you to stick it out. Like we weren't promised easy. Walking with Jesus is not easy, but it's better. And like pursuing him and serving, that's what I feel like I'm called to do. And I'm called to ministry. I'm not called to being a student pastor at CCV. I'm called to like pursue Jesus and be in ministry. So that's what I'm going to do. I think that's like being someone who's willing to stick around. And here's the value of that. Like being oftentimes, if you leave a church or a ministry before 4 or 5 years, you don't get to see the fruit. Like you don't get to watch anything happen. You don't get to watch families grow, and kids bring their parents. You don't get to see that if you're only there for a short window. And oftentimes that's the stuff that should inspire you to keep going. I recently, this weekend, actually, we hired one of our student pastors moved from part-time to full-time, and she was actually in my ministry at Anthem a long time ago. And so we got talking. We started talking about other people that she was friends with. And I just reached out. So here's what I would say. If you're in ministry and you've been doing ministry for a while, when's the last time you've reached out to kids who are still following Jesus and just said, hey, I'd love to talk to you? Because the reality is this. It's really easy in ministry to just remember the names of the kids that aren't following Jesus. And you wear that as like a sucky badge of honor often, or it's like, oh, I invested so much time in this kid and now they're doing this, or like you're on Instagram and they're like, well, I got to unfollow this person. And it's like, and you wear that as student power, which isn't fair. It has nothing in scripture says that you need to wear that. Like your job is to plant seeds. However, on the flip side of that, allow the stories of people who are running after Jesus to inspire you. And just 2 phone calls this weekend where I randomly texted 2 old students And I was like, let's talk. And this weekend I talked to Ali for an hour. I talked to Gavin for an hour, and you just like, you get off the phone and you're like, okay, like I can do this. Like I love doing this. And I would just say, make it a priority to like seek out some of your old students who you know are like, who you know love Jesus, and just talk to them and just let them encourage you. Not like, and not even, and here's the reality, not one of them even said like, Jake, I'm doing this because of you. Just talking to someone and ask them questions about their marriage that they're like pursuing Jesus in. And like, just, I don't know, I just think it's life-giving. And we spend a lot of time seeking out the people and remembering the people that didn't work, or they are yet. As I say, yet, like we're not closing the door on anybody, but have you made an effort to reconnect with people who still love Jesus? I think those are relationships that should fire you up and fill your bucket.
Absolutely. Well, that's encouraging to me. I mean, just thinking through I had name upon name, and both of those categories, just kind of pop into my head right as you were talking about that. And I couldn't agree with you more, just committing to being present, committing to where God has you for a season, and not that anything's permanent. None of us are permanent. We're all interim, right? That whole saying, but just committing to say, hey, I'm going to be here and I'm not going to leave immediately. I'm not just going to jump at the next thing or the bigger church or the more money or the whatever that's going to be thrown at you. Because those things come and go. But the calling on our lives as ministers to love the sheep that are in our city that God has called and prepared for us. That's a very special thing, and it's a sacred thing. So, Jake, thanks so much for just sharing some wisdom. So much good stuff on leadership and team and how to cast vision around just making relationships the number one thing. So much good stuff in here. Before we end our time together, just any ways that people could get in contact with you, maybe follow you on social media, say somebody's got a question or anything like that. Anything that you'd be willing to share there.
Listen, I'm sure millions of people listening to this.
Millions.
Dude, I'll just give you my phone number. I don't care. Like, just text me. So it's 231-349-4653. My name is Jake. Text me. Say who you are. I'd love to talk to you. Like, zero issues.
Love it.
So, I don't know. Put it in the description or something. If you want to get a hold of me, that's the best way. So, let's hang out. We have nothing. And just to be clear, the stuff that CCV has, I'm not responsible for. Like, the CCV as a church has been crushing for a long time, and I just get to step into it seasonally. But I'm not holding on to stuff. So if you think it'd be helpful, if you ask, I'll give it to you. Would love to help you out.
Love that. Well, Jake, thanks so much for your time, man. We appreciate you, and God bless you, what you're doing. Just praying that God's Spirit just fills you up and encourages you for taking some time out of your day to do this and encourage some other people. So it's been a big encouragement to me. Thank you.
Sweet. Thanks, man. It was awesome.